Mission Sunday at Metropolitan. What a great day. I'm tempted just to pronounce the benediction, and some of you are saying, oh, would he please? You hear the children singing. I've got tears in my eyes. I hope I can see some of the notes that I wrote for you. To hear them singing to the Lord God of heaven and earth. What a blessing on Missions Sunday. Are you aware that all of us sitting here tonight are the product of missions? It did not start here in Oklahoma. It started 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem. In fact, it is missions that brought me to Metropolitan. 1969, I was being interviewed in a number of different venues to go and be involved in ministry. And when I visited with Dave Cotton and Bill Bryan, I asked them about the missions program because I was heavily involved in it at Dallas Seminary. They said, well, we're giving about a third of our budget to missions. I'm in. That's all I needed to know about. It didn't even matter what the job was. It's all work. It just has to be done, right? So just bail in and get it done. But the church itself, the heart of the church, was missions. Caleb, I'm so excited about what you're going to do as a product of this church, going out, planting other churches here locally. Missions isn't just about other places. It's about here as well. Missions is what I celebrated when I asked Pastor Rick, how are we doing? Are we still doing okay with our giving towards missions? And he assured me we were. So missions has been a part of what I have been about for over 50 years. It drew me away from this church to Dallas Seminary because I could teach for 8 to 9 months and then be traveling for the rest of the time. And during that time, over 35 years, I visited over 35 different countries. And I was able to see the work of God, the hand of God working throughout this planet. It is amazing, and you will never hear about it on CNN. You have to come to church to hear about it, because this is where we celebrate it, and that's what we're doing today. So what am I going to try to do to celebrate this Missions Sunday? Well, of course, we are thanking God for the missionaries that are here and present with us. That is a blessing to this congregation. And hearing them in Sunday school and throughout the week, what a wonderful, wonderful encouragement this will be for you. I hope you are able to come to every single meeting. But I want to share with you what the gospel is doing, that deep, penetrating oil of God. It is saturating this planet. It's amazing. By traveling where I did and also teaching at Dallas Seminary, where we were like a giant vacuum sucking the brains out of other countries and then sending them back, I had the advantage of hearing and seeing what God was doing. It is amazing. We will start, of course, in the book of Acts with the advent of the Holy Spirit, because he's responsible for all of this. We're just a part of the process, but he's the prime mover. Acts chapter 2, I'm not going to read these passages, but you can read them, and you should read them. In Acts chapter 2, verses 9 to 11, when the advent of the Spirit comes, and Peter is preaching this magnificent gospel message, 3,000 people trusted Christ on that day from 13 different countries. Luke documents where they are from, and it's all over the Middle East. What an explosion happened in Acts chapter 2. And sometimes we read this as history, like, well, that's wonderful that it got started like that. But what you don't see and hear about is that the explosion is still going on. It has not stopped. That deep, penetrating oil of God is saturating this planet this morning. This morning. So I'm just going to give you a taste. Here's my plan. And you are my victims. So, there's no escape now. You're in. And the plan is for me just to take you to a brief few words in a text about what God did, and then to fast forward for 2,000 years and to tell you what God's doing today. So you see both. This is not something new. This has been going on, even though you don't see it or hear about it. In Acts chapter 8, the gospel is literally exploding from Jerusalem. The Spirit has come, and God is doing amazing things to get His gospel into the world in an unprecedented way. In Acts chapter 8, the story is there of the Ethiopian eunuch. You have read the story, you've heard it preached. Surely you've heard it preached. He was a royal official of the Ethiopian government. He was headed home. He had been in Jerusalem. And by a means that I can't understand, he was able to get his hands on an Isaiah scroll. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get an Isaiah scroll in those days? They are hand copied. It's not like the Gideons were out handing them out. They were expensive. Of course, he was wealthy, given his position in the Ethiopian government. But he has a copy of the Isaiah scroll. And now I'm going to give you the Mike Lawson quick and dirty translation of what he said. I got it. I don't get it. That's directly from the Greek. It is a paraphrase. I got it. I don't get it. And by God's grace, God moves through the Holy Spirit onto Philip, and he puts him in the presence of this man. Do you understand what you're reading? No. How can I? And Philip has that pleasure of introducing him to the Lord Jesus Christ, the person Isaiah was talking about. Now, how cool is that? On a desert road? Are you kidding me? With a copy of the Isaiah scroll, a Jew and an Ethiopian eunuch talking about Jesus Christ? Amazing. The deep, penetrating oil of God. Well, he baptizes that eunuch and sends him back to his country. What do you suppose he did when he got there? What did you do when you received Christ? I can tell you what I did. I alienated just about everybody that would sit still for a minute and listen to me. Incredible. Incredible that you would have your sins forgiven. Whew. I never got over it. I'm not over it to this day. I was sitting right there thinking about it this morning. How is it that God could take all of those sins, not mine, yours, and gather them up and place them on Jesus Christ? I don't know how that happened. I'm grateful. I'm grateful. I've not gotten over it. And that's the gospel. The gospel that God has taken your sins and put them on Christ. Well, what a story to start a message on missions. An Ethiopian receives the gospel. Fast forward 2,000 years. Like your tape recorder used to do. All right. See, some of you do remember tape recorders. I know who you are. I'm at Dallas Seminary, but I'm not in Dallas Seminary. I'm in in Jordan. I'm in Jordan, but I'm in an Iraqi refugee church. Okay, this was during the war between Iraq and Iran. And there were refugees that were in Jordan. Now, they had nothing to do because there wasn't any work for them to do, and there wasn't any place for them to go, and there certainly were no schools for the children, but this church had reached out to the children, and so my audience was 80% children, Iraqi children. You staying with me? You got your geography straight? Okay. Well, the pastor was Lebanese. Okay, you got a Lebanese pastor of an Iraqi church in Jordan. Do you understand the work of God? I don't. How he does these things is an amazing thing to me. But I'm there. I'm preaching. This pastor was one of my students at the seminary, the only evangelical seminary in an Arab country. The only one. And so, I preached. Do I like preaching to kids? Oh, please. Yes. Well, after the service, and there's more to this story, just being so disciplined, Tish, you'll be so proud of me. After the service, the pastor, this Lebanese pastor, comes up to me, and he says, I want you to meet somebody. Well, that's normal. After a service, pastors usually want to introduce you to an elder or to a deacon or to a Sunday school teacher or somebody. And so I said, fine. And so he brings this young man up to me. Now, he's a little taller than me. I heard that. And this young man was an Iraqi, but he had papers. So he could travel. He had been a diver off the Libyan coast. And he was one of those divers that wear a helmet. And he had gone down one day, and while he was diving on the bottom of the ocean, he spotted something that was unnatural, so he reached over and picked it up, and it's a book. It's a leather-bound book. And so he didn't have one, so he decided to take it back up with him. So when he goes up, he takes this thing up with him. He goes back to his room, and he dries it out. It's a little fluffy, but it was in his language, and he could read it. It didn't make any sense to him. He didn't know at the time that it was a Bible. But he's reading it. He's trying to figure out. He got it, but he didn't get it. Sound familiar? So the next time he goes down, his handlers play a joke on him and cut off his oxygen. He almost died. When he gets back to the surface, he quits immediately. I could never trust you guys again, ever. And so he had papers, he had money, and so he had heard that his family had escaped to Jordan. So he goes to Jordan in Amman. And refugees tend to huddle together. So after talking to some people, he finally figured out where his family was, and he knocks on their door. Of course, when they open it up, this was before cell phones, okay? Can some of you remember when it was before cell phones? Thank you, Jesus. And when you come back, that's what I'm expecting. No cell phones. Sorry. A little commentary is necessary every now and then. So they didn't expect him. And he just shows up. Well, imagine the family reunion. Everybody is so excited to see him, and there's, just talking and jabbering and going on and on, how it goes when families get together in unexpected reunions. And when everything settled, he said, I found this book. And he says, I don't know what it is, but it's interesting to me, and it's leather bound. And by the way, are you aware of why they print Bibles in India ink? Yes, because it doesn't fade. You can put a Bible that's in India ink, you can soak it in water, it'll come out looking just perfect. And that's the way his looked, a little fluffy. And he said, you won't believe it, but I've got this book, but I don't understand it. And they said, you won't believe it, but we've been attending a church where they teach the Bible. That book that you've got, they teach us about that. And guess what? We meet tonight, the very night that he arrived. Does that shock any of you? That God can arrange things so precisely, so wonderfully, that this man who was at the bottom of the ocean and finds a Bible is now with a family that is connected to a church that is teaching the Bible? What a deal. And that night, he got it. And he really got it. And he was baptized because he had trusted Jesus Christ as his Savior. What a story. Now, there are more angles to this story than I've got time to tell you. But imagine it. Finding a Bible at the bottom of an ocean. Well, it was a great story, and I enjoyed every minute of it and prayed with that young man. The gospel can find its way to the bottom of an ocean. Well, I want to tell you another story. It comes out of the Gospels this time. Now, those of you that are missionaries, okay, I'm going to test you tomorrow because we're meeting, at 10. And I am a professor. Or at least I was. I think I was. Wasn't I, honey, a professor at one time? So it's going to be a bit of a test for you tomorrow. I want to know if any preacher you have ever heard or any missionary you've ever heard have ever used this particular text as a missions text. I don't think so. I've been at a lot of missions conferences. I've never heard it. That's why I used it. You see, I have this marginally criminal mind. And it causes me to find things that other people don't find or see things maybe other people don't see. And this one I just fell in love with. It is, of course, towards the end of Jesus' life. It is the night that he was betrayed. And there is a lady who's going to come to him, and she is going to take the most expensive vial of oil that you can imagine. You've read the story how many times? And he's reclining at table, which means he's laying on one side, probably his left side. In order for her to get to his head, she has to get down on her knees. Now, this is playing in my mind. It's not in the text. But she takes this oil and she anoints his head. He says is for his burial. She pours all of this out. Of course, the disciples complain. Well, of course we would. We're deacons, right? We always complain about how you spend the money. Yeah, no, she did a wonderful thing. Would you please take note, when you read the Gospels, how many beautiful things the ladies do? You rarely see a man do any of those things, but the ladies do. And this woman does. And Jesus says these words. I'm going to read them from Matthew's Gospel in chapter 26. Truly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done shall also be spoken of in memory of her. Now, we're taught in seminary to go back to the original context and receive the text as those who were there received it. I'm going to tell you that's nonsense. Those guys had no clue what he was talking about. Wherever? You talking about Galilee? You're surely not talking about Samaria. See, it hadn't gotten that far. The Holy Spirit had not been given. These guys could not imagine what God was going to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ. They were clueless. And you know that. You've read the Gospels. They didn't get it. Wherever this gospel is preached. Wow. Are you wearing your seatbelt? Because you're going to need it for the next one. Wherever the gospel is preached. I was in Sri Lanka, and I was teaching a course as usual. One of my students was like this little Lebanese pastor He was Sri Lankan, and he wanted me to come and preach in his church. That's a sweet invitation. I just can't even tell you how kind it is for them to invite you to preach in their churches. And so I agreed and showed up on Sunday, preaching his church. The amazing thing was, I'm going to just tell you something. I was involved in the design of the Christian education facilities. The design of their facilities was just as good. His wife, thank you very much, ladies, designed it. She had been taught Christian education at the very school where I was teaching. And they had a magnificent Christian ed program. It was down to policies. I mean, I could see it in place. It was amazing. And so we had a few minutes before the service, and I asked him, okay, well, you know, this is a big church, 600 people in Sri Lanka. That's unusual. Nothing in America, but a lot in Sri Lanka. How did you come to be the pastor of this church? He says, well, it's a long story. I said, good. I love long stories, and it'll help me when I'm preaching because I need to fill up a little time. He said, I was one of the garbage dump children. Okay, I don't have a category. You have a category for that in your mind? Garbage dump child? I don't have a category. I said, well, explain that to me. He said, well, in Sri Lanka, if you're born and your parents don't want you, they dump you at the garbage dump. He says, I grew up there, and if you're there, you just kind of fend for yourself. There's no hope. There's no social services. The Buddhists nor the Hindus want anything to do with someone that has that bad karma. So we just kind of stumbled around, did the best we could as a group of boys. And one day this man came to our area. He came down to the garbage dump. And he gathered a few of us together that would sit with him. And he said, I'd like to teach you how to read. Would you like to learn how to read? We got nothing to do. We got nowhere to go. And so for weeks on end, he would come back to the garbage dump and he would teach us how to read. And you guessed it, didn't you? He used the Bible as his text. And once we learned how to read, guess what? He gave them one. What an idea. And then out of that little group of boys, he would select 3 or 4, and he would begin to take them with him on his preaching missions on Sunday. He was pastoring and had planted a number of churches, and he would preach in them in succession on Sunday, and he would take these boys with him over time, and over time, he allowed them and asked them to do various things, lead in prayer, read the scriptures, etc., etc. And he had also raised a little money so they could go to school. Well, they were getting a little schooling, best they could, and growing up with him. And then as they got a little older, he would take one of them and place them as pastor of one of those churches. And that's how this young man came to be the pastor of this church. He was a garbage dump child. You talk about the deep, penetrating oil of God seeping through this earth, covering this earth, reaching every nook and cranny, places you wouldn't go and I wouldn't go, but places where the gospel goes. And so this young man finds a Christian girl, they come together, they make this church, great Christian education program, 600 people meeting there every Sunday. I got there to watch them do Sunday school. Impressive. And if you teach in my Sunday school on Sunday, you go to the garbage dump on Thursday, and we teach those children. The penetrating oil of God is just going everywhere. There isn't a place that you can find that he is not doing his magnificent work with the gospel. Wherever the gospel is preached. Those disciples had no clue, but we do. we see it. We see it in ways that they could never even imagine. Wow. Well, would you let me bring this story a little closer to home? You wearing your seatbelt? Good. You might need it. It's a little text in the book of Romans. The Apostle Paul says this, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek." It is the power of God. It's not resident power like a battery. It's active power like your 110 outlet. You stick your finger in it, guess what? There's power. It's going to zap you. The gospel is the power of God. It is active. It is working inside of people, causing them to do things that they might not have thought of doing, but they start doing them anyway. They start doing them because the power of God is at work inside of them. And it happens in this church just like it happens in Iraq or Iran or Jordan, just like it happens in Sri Lanka. People are activated by the power of God inside of them. That gospel is working, and it works in unlikely people in unlikely ways. I'm just a young pastor. I don't know dits. I'm here in this church. I'm trying to do the best I can, stumbling along. But one of my fans, and we all have them, by the way. Every pastor's got fans, but we also have critics. My counsel to you as pastors and leaders, don't listen to your critics, but rejoice at your fans. Your fans probably think you're better than you really are, but your critics probably think you're worse than you really are, so you're somewhere in the middle. Thank God. Well, Verdi Taylor she was a fan. God bless her. She'd come to my office and just talk with me and have me pray with her. And I loved every minute with Verdi Taylor. She was a woman of God, and she'd walked with God her whole life, and she was coming towards the end of her life, and she was a dear, dear saint. Well, one day she tells me, "Pastor Mike, I've got vertigo. I can barely stand up most of the time because I get so dizzy, and I can never walk. If I go to church, it's because somebody has helped me, come by to get me, put me in their car and take me to church, help me inside. So I won't be coming very much anymore." We both grieved at that because Verdi loved church. She loved to come and worship the Lord. And I said, "Verdi, I'm so sorry." She said, "Pastor Mike, do you ever need anybody to pray for you?" I mean, you know, in those moments when you get a phone call and you have to rush to some place and you don't have time to stop for 15, 20 minutes and pray and get ready for it. You just got to show up and be their pastor. I said, "Verdi, that happens more often than I care to remember." She said, "You know, I can't walk, but I can pray. If you'll have the secretaries call me when you rush out of the church, I'll pray for you." I said, "Verdi, you don't even know what you're talking about, how important that is." So we went to the secretaries, and we set up the process, and it wasn't that long, honestly. And I got probably the worst phone call I ever got at this church. I'm sorry because some of the emotion of that moment comes back to me. The voice on the other side said, "In my family, there's been a double suicide. A husband and a wife have killed themselves, and they were close relatives of this person who called me. Can you come?" It's not a multiple choice test, okay? You have to come. So I jumped out of my seat and I ran through the office and I said, "Call Verdi Taylor. I need you to have her praying for me." when you go into a family where there's been a double suicide, the couple decided that they could not live any longer and killed themselves. It's horrible. It's horrible. It's unspeakable. And so I went. I didn't know. What do you say? What would you say? Yeah, you don't have words either. I didn't. But when I opened the door, this person opened the door for me, and they grabbed me and held on to me. I was their pastor. I was the one that they had looked to bring comfort to them in some way, and just holding on to me. Literally, in the very moment that we embraced, there was a stream of people that came right behind me and walked right in that door and went right into the dining room area, and they spread out tablecloths. And they put urns of coffee and water and tea. They had sandwiches and chip and dip and cookies and napkins and plates and knives and forks. And they set this thing up in a heartbeat. I was still holding this person when they exited. And the last person out, her name is Jewel Slaughter. She slips up to my friend and whispers, "Don't clean up. We'll be back." The gospel is the power of God unto salvation. It causes people to do things in ministry. It causes people to pray when they don't even know the circumstances. It causes people to bring food to grieving families in terrible moments that can never be replaced. What do you think? Think God's still doing what He started out to do 2,000 years ago in unusual places with unusual people? Yeah. The Bible at the bottom of the ocean, an anonymous pastor reaching garbage dump children, a woman who could no longer walk but can pray, people who prepare meals and bring them to grieving families. The gospel, the power of God, it is that oil that is seeping in and covering our earth. Oh, did I mention? Did I mention the 300 million Christians that are in China? Did I say that before? I must have forgotten something. It's not unusual for me to forget things anymore. 300 million, and that was 20 years ago. That church is exploding. I've been there. That number was given to me by the government, not by some missionary that's trying to make the numbers sound good. The government didn't know what to do with them. That's why I was there. Or did I mention Satellite 7? A ministry that's hovering over the entire Muslim world and broadcasting in 3 languages, Arabic, Farsi, and Turkish. 25 million people are listening to that, 97% of which are not Christian. Wow. Or how about our neighbor, Cuba? What do you think? What have you heard on the news about Cuba lately? One of the men who graduated from our school and went down to Cuba, he's actually from Latin America. And in Cuba, he has planted, okay, you ready? You're not ready. Some of you think you're ready. You're not ready. 15,000 churches. He's planted 15,000 churches. The average attendance is 200, with some of them busting 1,000 in Cuba. The gospel, God's penetrating oil that's saturating our earth. What a joy to be a part of it. For you to gather some missionaries here to tell us what they're doing, how God is working through them, to listen to them, to give to them, to pray for them and for the others that can't be here. Oh, this is a really good Sunday. Mission Sunday at Metropolitan. Wow. My wife is afraid I'm going to go on and on, but I'm not. So let me conclude with these words. They're found in John's Gospel, and it's on the night that Jesus was betrayed. It's a wonderful word. Some of my favorite words in the Bible. You already know I have this marginally criminal mind, so I find passages that amuse me, and this one did. On that occasion, Jesus said, I have many more things to share with you, but you cannot bear them now. May God bless you.